My name is Madison. I am 32 years old, and I never imagined that my own mother would raise a champagne bottle against me. Yet that is exactly how my story begins. One moment, the room sparkled with laughter and crystal chandeliers. The next, glass shattered against my skull, and everything turned black. I woke up in a hospital bed with 23 stitches in my temple, my hair matted with blood, and a truth I could not ignore. Family, the people I once believed were meant to protect me, had become the most dangerous force in my life. The night was supposed to be about celebration. My younger brother Brandon had just been promoted, and my parents threw a lavish party at their North Shore estate. The house gleamed, every detail perfect, every guest dressed in designer clothes. I arrived in my crimson dress, gift in hand, still holding on to a foolish hope. Maybe, just maybe, my parents would look at me, their firstborn daughter, and feel proud of the life I had built. Instead, they looked through me. My mother's lips brushed my cheek with an air kiss, careful not to touch. My father's words were laced with passive aggression. Brandon soaked in the spotlight, their golden child, their pride and joy. I told myself it did not matter. I had achieved everything without their support. I had become a chief financial officer, then chief operating officer, through years of sacrifice and endless hours at the office. I had purchased my own condo in downtown Chicago, a dream home worth $680,000. I did not need their recognition. At least, that is what I kept repeating to myself. But deep down, there was always that little girl who once searched the audience for her parents at a piano recital, who cried silently when they never showed. That part of me longed for acknowledgement, for a moment where they would finally say, "We are proud of you, Madison." That night, when Brandon invited me to his celebration, I thought I might finally get it. What I did not realize was that I was walking into an ambush. As the night unfolded, whispers and strange glances circled me. Cousins asked about my condo with too much emphasis on the word still. I overheard Brandon bragging about a perfect place for him and his girlfriend to start their lives. My chest tightened as suspicion grew. Could they be talking about my home, the one I had bled for, sweated for, sacrificed 10 years for? I shook the thought away. Surely, even my family would not be that bold. I was wrong. When my mother closed the study door behind me, when my father steepled his fingers like a judge, when Brandon announced that my condo was the solution for his future, I felt the air leave my lungs. They were not asking. They were demanding. They expected me to hand over my condo as if it were a childhood toy he wanted to borrow. And when I refused, when I stood firm, the mask of civility cracked. My father's face turned red with rage. Brandon sneered like a child denied a treat. My mother hissed that I was selfish, cold, ungrateful. I walked out of that study believing I had won a small victory by protecting my boundaries. I did not yet know how far they were willing to go to punish me for saying no. So when my mother's hand gripped that champagne bottle, when she swung with all the fury of decades of favoritism and entitlement, I learned the most devastating lesson of my life. Family does not always mean love. Sometimes it means danger. And yet, what happened that night was not just the darkest chapter of my life. It became the turning point. The attack that almost broke me became the spark that transformed me. Because after the blood, the stitches, and the betrayal, I discovered something more powerful than fear. I discovered my own strength. This is not simply a story about violence at a party. It is a story about survival, boundaries, and the courage to walk away when love turns into chains. And if you stay with me until the end, you will see how what began as the worst night of my life became the foundation for the greatest victory I could ever claim. I remember opening my eyes in that sterile hospital room, the beeping of monitors echoing in my ears, and the taste of copper still on my lips. The doctor told me I had 23 stitches. My Uncle Thomas sat beside me, his hand wrapped gently around mine, his eyes filled with the sorrow of someone who had witnessed too much. In that moment, I knew my life would never look the same again. Family, I realized, is not always the safe harbor people pretend it to be. Sometimes it is the storm itself. That night, the illusion shattered completely. My parents, Michael and Eleanor, had made it clear. In their world, my only value was in what I could give to Brandon. I was not their daughter. I was a resource to be drained. When I tell you this story, I want you to feel the weight I carried. For decades, I tried to be the good child, the achiever, the one who would earn love through effort. But every success was brushed aside. Every award, every promotion, every late night spent proving myself meant nothing when compared to Brandon's mediocrity. He was their golden boy. I was invisible. At my piano recital in 8th grade, I played Beethoven until my fingers cramped. I searched the crowd for my parents, my heart pounding with nervous pride. They never came. Later, I learned it was because Brandon had baseball practice. Not a game, just practice. That was the first time I cried myself to sleep, wondering why I was never enough. Birthdays told the same story. At 16, I got a second-hand laptop. At 16, Brandon received a brand new car. When I graduated at the top of my class, they threw a dinner at home. When Brandon scraped through with a C average, they rented out a restaurant. My entire childhood was a masterclass in being overlooked. It would have been easy to believe their narrative that I was the problem. Too serious, too driven, too cold. My mother said boys don't like girls who try too hard. My father claimed I had to work twice as much just to keep up with Brandon's natural talent. But I knew the truth. I was not the problem. Their blindness was. So, at 18, I chose freedom. I packed my bags, left their house, and started building my life from scratch. I waitressed at a diner, tutored math on weekends, and scraped together scholarships. I took out loans, studied late into the night, and refused to let their neglect define me. Those years of exhaustion forged me. Every bill I paid myself, every meal of ramen, every hour of tutoring a struggling student became bricks in the foundation of my independence. It was not glamorous, it was not easy. But it was mine. And the irony? That independence, the very thing they mocked me for, became the reason I now stand here, telling you this story not as a victim, but as a woman who has carved her own path. Before I continue, let me pause for just a moment. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt invisible in your own family, I want to know where you are watching from. Share it in the comments, because your voice matters here. And if stories like mine resonate with you, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Sometimes, just knowing we are not alone changes everything. Because here is the truth. The hospital bed was not the beginning of my downfall. It was the beginning of my awakening. That scar on my temple did not mark defeat. It marked the boundary I had finally drawn in blood. From here, the story only grows sharper, darker, and strangely enough brighter. The stitches healed, but the lessons cut deeper. And the next part of my journey will take you back through the choices that made me, the sacrifices I carried, and the moment I realized I could never go back to being that invisible child. Stay with me. Because this is where the real transformation begins. From the outside, our suburban home in Chicago looked like the picture of success. The hedges were trimmed, the driveway spotless, and the front porch light always glowing. But step inside, and you would find a world where love was rationed and loyalty was reserved for one child only. That child was my younger brother Brandon. From the day he was born, when I was only 5, my parents seemed to forget I even existed. It was as though their world had narrowed to a single shining star, and I was merely the shadow cast behind him. While most parents try to hide favoritism, mine wore it proudly, like a badge of honor. I remember one night more clearly than most. I was in 8th grade, and I had been practicing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata for months. My teacher had chosen me to perform in the school recital, and I poured my entire soul into every note. I stayed up late, my fingers aching from repetition, my young heart burning with the hope that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally be proud. When the night arrived, I scanned the crowd for them, my chest tight with nerves. Each time the door opened, I expected to see their familiar faces, but the seat stayed empty. My parents never came. Later, I learned why. Brandon had baseball practice, not a championship game, not even a tournament, just practice. I rode home in silence with my teacher, who tried to comfort me by saying, "Your playing was beautiful, Cassandra. You should be proud." But I couldn't. How could I, when the two people whose pride I craved the most couldn't even show up? That was not the only time. It became a pattern that played out year after year. At 16, on my birthday, I unwrapped a second-hand laptop. A week later, Brandon turned 16, and my parents handed him the keys to a brand-new car parked in the driveway. At my high school graduation, where I stood as valedictorian, they hosted a modest dinner at home. 4 years later, Brandon stumbled through with a C average, and they rented out an entire restaurant to celebrate. The message was clear. No matter how hard I worked, no matter what I achieved, it was never enough. Brandon was their golden child. I was the afterthought. My mother often told me I was too serious, that boys didn't like girls who tried so hard. My father explained that Brandon had natural talent, and I just had to work harder to keep up. Their words carved themselves into my skin like invisible scars. I started to believe that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too much, too driven, too cold. But deep down, I knew. I knew the truth. I wasn't the problem. Their blindness was. There were nights when I would sit on my bed, staring at the glow in the dark stars I had stuck to my ceiling, whispering promises to myself. Promises that one day I would get out. One day I would prove them wrong. One day I would be seen. Even when they ignored my victories, even when they downplayed my dreams, I held on to that secret vow. Their favoritism became the fire that fueled me. The more they overlooked me, the harder I worked. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I would carve a place in the world so undeniable that they would have no choice but to acknowledge me. But I also carried something else, something heavier, a loneliness that no success could erase. Because when you are a child, what you want more than anything is not medals or diplomas. You want love. And I learned early on that love in my family came with conditions, conditions I could never meet. So I became invisible. And yet, invisibility had its own kind of power. In their neglect, I learned resilience. In their rejection, I learned to fight for myself. I wish I could tell you that the story got better, that somewhere along the way they realized their mistake and chose to love us equally. But that moment never came. The gap only widened. Brandon was coddled and celebrated, while I was criticized and dismissed. Still, even in that darkness, there was a spark. A defiance that grew with each slight, each dismissal. It told me, one day, you will not need them. One day, you will stand on your own. And that spark became the flame that would eventually carry me out of their house and into a life built with my own hands. But before I could break free, I had to endure more years of being the forgotten child, the one left out of photos, left out of praise, left out of love. Looking back, those years shaped me more than I realized at the time. They were cruel, yes, but they also forged the steel in my spine. Because being invisible taught me something powerful. It taught me that when no one else sees your worth, you must learn to see it yourself. And that lesson would follow me into the next chapter of my life, when I finally walked away at 18 and chose independence over invisibility. At 18, I finally realized that waiting for my parents to notice me was like waiting for rain in the desert. It would never come. So, I packed a duffel bag, tucked my acceptance letter to Northwestern University inside, and walked out of that house for the last time as their dependent daughter. Unlike Brandon, who stayed at home with his tuition fully covered, I stepped into adulthood with nothing but determination. My parents didn't offer a dime, they didn't co-sign a loan. They didn't even hand me grocery money for that first week. If I wanted college, I had to earn it. So, I worked. I worked harder than anyone around me. By day, I sat in classrooms taking meticulous notes, chasing excellence like it was oxygen. By night, I slung plates at a 24-hour diner, the smell of frying oil clinging to my uniform as I balanced trays heavier than I was. On weekends, I tutored high school students in algebra and calculus, squeezing every dollar from my time just to keep the lights on in my tiny rented room. There were nights I cried myself to sleep from exhaustion. My body ached. My hands cracked from constant washing at the diner. My bank account hovered dangerously close to zero. But I refused to quit. Because quitting meant proving my parents right that I wasn't enough. And I would rather collapse from exhaustion than give them that satisfaction. Scholarships became my lifeline. I applied to every single one I could find. Some gave me a few $100s, others a few thousand. But each one was another step forward. I learned to stretch $1 until it screamed. Ramen became dinner. A thrift store jacket became my winter coat. But every sacrifice carried purpose. And then, something remarkable happened. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw me. Professors noticed my work ethic. Friends admired my resilience. No one compared me to Brandon. No one dismissed me for being too serious. I was judged by my effort, my ideas, my results, and for once, I thrived. I majored in finance. Numbers had always spoken to me in ways people never did. They were honest, clear. If you put in the work, they rewarded you. If you made a mistake, they showed you exactly where you went wrong. In numbers, there was fairness. And in fairness, I found freedom. After graduation, I landed an entry-level job at a boutique investment firm. The salary was modest, but I didn't care. It was a door cracked open. I furnished my tiny studio with second-hand furniture, slept on a futon, and ate peanut butter sandwiches most nights. But each time I signed my own rent check, I felt a surge of pride. I was building something that belonged entirely to me. Over the next decade, I climbed. Step by step, rung by rung, I clawed my way up the corporate ladder. 60-hour work weeks became normal. I earned my MBA in night classes, my eyes red from staring at spreadsheets, my brain foggy from too much coffee and too little sleep. I took on projects nobody else wanted, the ones that demanded impossible hours and endless patience. And slowly, the rewards came. By 30, I was the chief financial officer of Initech Solutions, a rising tech company. My salary quadrupled. My investments blossomed. For the first time, I had financial stability, and not the kind that could be ripped away by favoritism or neglect. It was mine, built brick by brick, through sweat and sacrifice. The pinnacle came last year, when I signed the papers for my dream condo. $680,000, floor-to-ceiling windows. A view of Lake Michigan that glittered like spilled diamonds at night. The day I held those keys, I cried, not because of the luxury, but because every inch of that condo represented a piece of me. 10 years of struggle. 10 years of proving myself. 10 years of surviving without the love I thought I needed. And yet, even then, I made the same mistake. I thought maybe, if I showed my parents what I had built, they would finally be proud. So I told them. I sent photos. I invited them to visit. My mother's response? That's nice, dear. My father's? The tech bubble will burst eventually. Brandon's? Must be nice. Must be nice. Their indifference should have been the final nail in the coffin, but some part of me, some stubborn, foolish part, still hoped. Still longed for their approval. Still believed that maybe one day they would see me. What I didn't know was that my condo, the very symbol of my independence, would become the battlefield for the most brutal fight of my life. Because while I saw it as the reward for a decade of sacrifice, they saw it as something else entirely. They saw it as Brandon's. Hope can be the most dangerous illusion. Even after years of indifference, even after decades of being overlooked, I still carried a fragile thread of it. When Brandon called to invite me to his promotion party, I felt a flutter in my chest that I should have recognized as false hope. Maybe this time would be different, I thought. Maybe with both of us successful, my parents would finally acknowledge my worth. The night of the party was crisp, October air brushing cool against my skin as I pulled into the long driveway of their North Shore home. The house looked like something out of a magazine, manicured hedges, soft golden lighting, cars lined up in front, every one of them a luxury model. I parked my Lexus at the end of the line and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Crimson cocktail dress, black stilettos, pearl necklace. I looked powerful. I looked like someone worth noticing, In the passenger seat was my gift to Brandon, a Mont Blanc pen set, expensive and carefully chosen. I wanted it to say both congratulations and goodwill. I wanted to walk into that house as an equal. My mother opened the door before I even rang the bell, her champagne glass already in hand. "Cassandra, you made it," she said, her tone more surprised than pleased. An air kiss, no warmth, no real contact. No compliment on how I looked. Just a reminder that in her world, I was always slightly out of place. Inside, the great room glittered under chandeliers. Waitstaff carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. 50 guests mingled in designer clothes. It was the kind of party that screamed perfection. And yet, beneath the polish, something felt wrong. Aunt Patricia spotted me first. Unlike my parents, her arms wrapped me in a genuine hug. "I've been following your company in the Tribune. That merger you orchestrated was brilliant," she said. For a brief moment, I felt seen. She even mentioned how proud my late grandfather would have been, a man who, unlike my parents, always believed in me. That moment warmed me more than any glass of champagne ever could. But as soon as I stepped toward Brandon, the contrast sharpened. He looked almost startled to see me. "Oh, Cassie, you made it," he said, echoing our mother's tone. His girlfriend Jennifer stood beside him, smiling thinly as she complimented my dress in that way meant to sting. He barely acknowledged my gift before setting it aside unopened. The air around him felt tight, as though my presence was an inconvenience he had to tolerate. Everywhere I turned, there were whispers. Relatives asking about my condo, stretching the words "still," as if I wouldn't have it for long. Brandon huddling with my parents in corners, their conversations halting the moment I passed by. Even my cousin Lisa's casual questions carried an edge. And then I overheard it. Brandon, speaking to one of his friends near the bar. "Yeah, it should all be resolved tonight. The place is perfect. Corner unit, high floor, amazing views. Jen already has decorating ideas." My hand froze around my champagne glass. He was describing my condo, my $680,000 home. The one I had built my life around. The one I had sacrificed for. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, but my stomach twisted with dread. Something was coming. I just didn't know what. That was when Uncle Thomas pulled me aside on the patio. His voice was low, urgent. "Cassandra, be careful. I've overheard your parents and Brandon tonight. They're planning something involving you." My heart sank. "What kind of plan?" He shook his head. "I don't know all the details, but it's serious. Promise me you'll keep your guard up." Before I could press him, my mother appeared in the doorway. "Cassandra, there you are. Brandon wants to speak with you in your father's study." And that was when I realized it. This party wasn't just about Brandon's promotion. It was about me. About what they wanted from me. What followed in that study would change everything. But before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like your family expected too much from you, like your success automatically belonged to them? Share your thoughts in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's lived through this kind of silent theft. Because that night, in that room, I discovered just how far my family would go, and the truth was worse than I could have ever imagined. My father's study had always been a place of intimidation. As a child, I would stand outside its heavy mahogany door, clutching a report card or bracing for punishment. It was a room filled with leather chairs, towering bookshelves, and the lingering smell of cigars. Walking back into it that night, I felt like that little girl again, nervous, small, waiting to be judged. Brandon stood by the fireplace, pretending to look casual but failing. My father sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, his expression cool and calculating. My mother closed the door with a soft click, and the sound echoed like a verdict. I perched on the edge of the chair, my handbag in my lap, my spine straight. The tension in the room was suffocating. "First, we want to say how proud we are of your success," my father began, his lawyer's voice smooth but sharp. "You've certainly exceeded expectations with your career." Exceeding expectations. Whose expectations? Certainly not mine. It was the faintest compliment, wrapped in condescension, but I forced a polite, "Thank you." My mother leaned forward, her tone syrupy. Your position, your financial stability, it's all very impressive for a woman your age. The words landed like a slap. For a woman. Always an asterisk, always a qualifier. Then Brandon spoke. Jen and I are getting engaged. I smiled despite everything. Congratulations, that's wonderful news. Whatever our differences, engagement was something worth celebrating. But before I could exhale, he continued. We're planning a spring wedding, and afterward, we want to buy our first home together. That sounds perfect, I replied, still oblivious to the trap being set. I'm sure Mom and Dad will help you find something nice. A glance passed between my parents. My father leaned forward. Actually, we've been discussing the perfect solution for Brandon and Jennifer, and for the family as a whole. A prickle of dread crawled up my neck. What solution? Your condo, Brandon said flatly. It's the right size, close to work, prestigious, perfect for us. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. My condo? What about my condo? My mother stepped closer, her voice adopting the coaxing tone she used when trying to get me to hand over toys to Brandon as a child. Sweetheart, you're doing so well. You could easily buy another place. But for Brandon and Jennifer, this condo would give them the foundation they need to start their life together. The audacity of it nearly knocked the air from my lungs. You're asking me to give Brandon my home? The property I spent 10 years working for? Not give, my father corrected smoothly. Transfer. We'll handle all the paperwork. You won't need to worry about a thing. And in return? I asked, my voice sharp. The satisfaction of helping your brother, he replied. Family supports family. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity was unbearable. You want me to hand over my $680,000 condo as a wedding gift? When you put it that way, it sounds transactional, my mother complained. It is transactional, I snapped. You're literally asking me to give away the home I worked 60-hour weeks to afford. The home I sacrificed a decade for. Brandon's face twisted with anger. You know I can't afford a place like that yet. Neither could I at your age, I shot back. That's why I worked hard, saved, invested wisely. That's what adults do. That's different, he muttered. The market was better when you started. A lie so bold it burned. I turned to my parents, my voice trembling but firm. That condo represents every missed holiday, every late night, every sacrifice I made. And you want me to throw it away because Brandon feels entitled to it? My father's face turned red. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? What sacrifices? I demanded. I paid my own tuition. I bought my own books. I worked 2 jobs. Meanwhile, you paid for Brandon's education, his apartments, his cars. You gave him everything. What did you ever give me? My mother's lips curled. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years. That's not generosity, I replied. That's the bare minimum. It's called parenting. The room grew hot with fury. Brandon's voice cracked with rage. I always knew you were selfish. Always thinking about yourself, never about family. I stood. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I'm not giving you my condo. Not now. Not ever. Adjust your expectations. My father rose too, looming over me. If you walk out that door without agreeing, you're no daughter of mine. For a heartbeat, I felt that old ache, the child desperate for approval. But then I remembered the truth. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need them at all. That's your choice, I said quietly. But my home is not up for negotiation. I turned toward the door, my heart pounding. Behind me, my mother hissed. Ungrateful, Brandon snarled. This isn't over. I looked back once, meeting their furious eyes with calm resolve. Yes, it island. But I was wrong. It wasn't over. It was only beginning. The moment I stepped back into the great room, the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't yet name. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, glasses clinked, laughter rippled across the crowd, but all of it sounded faint, distant, like I was underwater. I wanted to slip out quietly, to disappear into the cool October night, but leaving would have felt like surrender, and I had surrendered enough in my life. I grabbed another glass of champagne, forcing myself to stand tall near Aunt Patricia and Uncle Thomas. Their presence grounded me, a reminder that not everyone in this family was blind. But when I caught sight of Brandon and Jennifer rejoining the crowd, their heads bent together, their eyes flicking toward me, I knew the ambush wasn't finished. Then, the sharp tap of a microphone cut through the chatter. My father stood at the front of the room, glass raised high. "If I could have everyone's attention," he called, his booming lawyer's voice commanding the space. "It's time to toast our man of the hour." Guests circled eagerly. Brandon took center stage, his arm draped around Jennifer, his grin wide and practiced. My father launched into a speech so inflated it could have floated away. He spoke of Brandon's meteoric rise, his unmatched brilliance, his transformative leadership. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Brandon was an assistant regional manager, not the savior of corporate America, but in my father's eyes, Brandon was already destined for Olympus. Then Brandon took the microphone, and I felt my stomach knot. He thanked our parents, his colleagues, Jennifer, standard fare until his gaze locked on me. His voice hardened. "There's one more thing I want to talk about tonight. Family support." The room stilled. My pulse thundered. "Most of you know my sister Cassandra has done well for herself," he continued, his tone edged with disdain. "She has a fancy job, a big salary, and recently bought an expensive condo downtown." Murmurs rose from the guests. I could feel their eyes on me, assessing, curious. "What you don't know," Brandon went on, "is that when her only brother asked for help when our family asked for one act of generosity she refused." Gasps echoed through the room. My cheeks burned hot, but I stood still, my face neutral, the same expression I had worn in boardrooms where men tried to dismiss me. "That's not what happened," I said clearly, my voice cutting across the silence. "Then tell everyone," Brandon challenged. "Tell them how you refused to help your family." "I refused to give you my home," I corrected. "There's a difference." My mother glided to Brandon's side, her navy dress gleaming under the lights. "What Cassandra fails to understand is that family supports family. We've always been there for her. And now, when Brandon needs her, she turns her back." The audacity left me breathless. I couldn't help but laugh, a sharp, bitter sound. "When have you ever been there for me?" "Ungrateful," my mother hissed. "Success has made you selfish, cold." "No," I said, my voice rising. "I built everything on my own. My degrees, my career, my home. None of it came from you, none." Aunt Patricia stepped forward. "She's telling the truth. I've watched how you treated them differently their whole lives." Her voice carried across the room, a rare ally in the lion's den. But the room split. Some guests clung to my parents' narrative, nodding sympathetically. Others avoided eye contact, ashamed at the spectacle unfolding. A few, just a few, stood nearer to me, silent witnesses who saw the truth. Brandon's face twisted. "This was supposed to be my night, and once again, you've made it about yourself." I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I came here to support you. I brought a gift. I congratulated you. I never once mentioned my own achievements. You dragged me into this." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Guests shifted uneasily, some grabbing coats, others whispering furiously. The celebration had become a tribunal, decades of favoritism and resentment boiling to the surface. And in that moment, as the room turned into a battlefield, I realized something chilling. This wasn't about property anymore. It wasn't even about Brandon. This was about power, about control. My parents weren't just trying to take my condo. They were trying to take my autonomy, my independence, the very proof that I had survived without them. And they would stop at nothing to crush it. Before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal how this confrontation spiraled into violence and betrayal, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been in a moment where the people who should have supported you most turned against you instead? Where family became the battlefield? Share your story below, because I know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to see where my story goes, stay with me. The twist you're about to hear is one you won't forget. Because what happened next proved one thing beyond doubt. Blood may bind you, but it can also break you. The party was no longer a celebration. It had become a courtroom without a judge, a theater of betrayal where every guest was an unwilling witness. Brandon glared at me from across the room, his face flushed with drink and anger, while my mother's voice rang out like a dagger. "See? This is who she really is," she told the crowd. "Ungrateful, selfish, cold." I stood my ground, my pulse racing but my voice steady. "No, this is who you are. You gave Brandon everything, cars, tuition, parties, while I worked myself to the bone for scraps. And now you expect me to hand over the one thing I built with my own hands?" The room buzzed with murmurs. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet my eyes. Others nodded faintly, as if silently admitting they had noticed the favoritism all along. Aunt Patricia spoke up again, her voice trembling but firm. "Michael, Eleanor, enough. You can't keep pretending this is about generosity. You've treated your children unequally since the day Brandon was born. Everyone here has seen it." My father's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked around the room, catching the uncertain faces of his friends. His reputation, polished for decades, was slipping. "You have no right to judge how we raised our children," he snapped. "And you have no right to demand I give away my home," I countered, louder this time. Brandon's fists clenched at his sides. He looked like a boy denied his favorite toy, his voice breaking as he shouted, "This is my night, Cassandra! You always ruin everything! I came here to celebrate you," I said, my throat tightening. "I brought you a gift," I said, "congratulations. I did nothing to make this about me. You dragged me into this with lies." Jennifer tugged at his arm, whispering, "Babe, maybe we should stop." But Brandon shook her off, too far gone in his rage. My cousin Albert, always one to stir trouble, called out from the crowd, "Why not sell the condo and split the money? That's fair, isn't it?" Uncle Thomas's voice cut through, sharp and clear. "Would any of you here sell your home because someone in your family decided they wanted it? Would you?" The room fell quiet. Eyes darted. No one answered. But my mother wouldn't let go. "She's always been like this," she insisted. "Even as a child, she never wanted to share with Brandon." That was the final straw. My composure cracked, my voice shaking with years of suppressed pain. "Share? You mean like when you gave him my college fund? Or when you missed my recitals for his baseball practices? Or when you forgot my birthdays 3 years in a row but threw him surprise parties every single time? Is that the kind of sharing you're talking about?" Gasps filled the room. My aunt's eyes brimmed with tears. My cousin Lisa looked down at her shoes, ashamed. And my father, his face red with fury, bellowed, "Enough! You will not stand here and humiliate us in our own home." But it was too late. The truth was out. The party fractured. Some guests drifted toward the door, eager to escape the chaos. Others whispered behind raised hands, scandal written on their faces. Brandon stood at the center, chest heaving, his glare locked on me. "You think you're better than me," he spat. "With your job, your condo, your money. But you're nothing without this family. Nothing." I felt a strange calm wash over me. "No, Brandon, I'm everything because I learned to live without this family." For a moment, silence. Then the shouting started again, overlapping voices, accusations, and defenses tangled together. The elegant party had turned into a battlefield of words, decades of resentment exploding in real time. I turned toward the door. "I should go," I said quietly, more to myself than anyone else. My mother's voice followed, sharp and icy. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every part of me wanted to turn, to argue, to make them see. But the stronger part, the part forged in years of neglect and hard work, knew there was no point. "Goodbye then," I said, my voice steady. Brandon's voice cracked through the noise, slurred by champagne. "You're not my sister anymore, Cassie. You're dead to this family." I kept walking, each step heavier than the last. But what none of us knew in that moment was that words weren't the end of it. Because the night was about to spiral far beyond insults. And the line between cruelty and violence was about to be crossed. I had almost reached the door when I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. Brandon's grip spun me around so fast my heels scraped against the hardwood floor. His face was inches from mine, his breath sour with champagne and whiskey. "We're not finished," he snarled, his eyes wild. Every instinct told me to push him away, but I stayed calm, my voice even. "Brandon, let me go. We can talk tomorrow, when everyone has cooled down." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Tomorrow? You think you can walk away from this? You think you can betray this family and just leave?" The room had gone silent. Guests stood frozen, glasses halfway to their lips, eyes darting nervously between us. From the corner of my vision, I saw Uncle Thomas start toward me, concern etched into his face. But before he could reach us, my father appeared beside Brandon, his hand on his son's arm. "Son, this isn't the way," he said softly. His voice lacked force, carrying the same indulgence he'd always given Brandon, no matter how badly he behaved. "Tell her, Dad," Brandon demanded, his grip tightening painfully on my shoulder. "Tell her what happens when she turns her back on this family." For a second, my father looked at me. And in his eyes, I saw something I had never admitted to myself before. Not disappointment, not frustration, but genuine dislike. "Your brother is right, Cassandra. Selfish behavior has consequences. If you walk out that door, you're no longer part of this family." The words hit harder than Brandon's grip. They weren't a threat anymore. They were a sentence. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. If family means giving up everything I've worked for to someone who's never lifted a finger, then maybe I'm better off without it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother pushed through the guests, her face twisted with rage. "How dare you speak to us this way, after everything we've done for you? Name one thing," I shot back. "One sacrifice you've made for me that you didn't make 10 times over for Brandon." Her mouth opened, then closed. No answer came. That silence said more than any words could. Brandon's grip dug into my shoulder, his voice rising. "You think you're so much better than me with your fancy job and your downtown condo, but you're nothing, nothing without this family." I stared at him, really seeing him not the golden child my parents worshipped, but a grown man drowning in entitlement. "No, Brandon, I am everything I made myself to be, and that's enough." I peeled his hand off my shoulder and turned back to the door. For a heartbeat I thought it was over. For a heartbeat I thought I was free. But rage has a way of finding its outlet. Behind me, my mother's voice shrieked, "Ungrateful girl!" And before I could react, before anyone could stop her, she grabbed a champagne bottle from a nearby table. Time slowed. I saw the arc of glass swinging toward me. I saw the horror on Aunt Patricia's face, the alarm in Uncle Thomas's eyes. Someone screamed a sharp, distant sound. Then pain exploded against my temple. The bottle shattered with a sickening crack. My knees buckled, vision blurring as warmth gushed down my cheek. My own blood. The room spun, faces warping into grotesque masks of shock. My legs gave out, and darkness closed in. The last thing I saw before collapsing was my mother's expression. Not horror, not regret, but satisfaction. I woke up hours later in the harsh light of the emergency room, my head bandaged, my body trembling. The doctor's voice was steady but grim. "Severe concussion, 23 stitches. You're lucky it wasn't worse." Uncle Thomas sat by my side, gripping my hand as though to anchor me. "You're safe now," he whispered. But I wasn't sure I believed him. Safe was a word that had never belonged in my family. Before I tell you what happened in the days that followed the police reports, the charges, the fallout, I want to ask you something. Have you ever seen a conflict with family cross that invisible line, where words turn into violence? Share your experience in the comments, because stories like these shouldn't stay hidden. Because my story didn't end in that hospital bed. It was only beginning, and the storm that followed would change everything. The first thing I remember when I woke was the steady beeping of a heart monitor. My left eye refused to open, swollen shut from the impact, and my skull throbbed with a pain so sharp it felt like fire crawling under my skin. The antiseptic smell of the hospital wrapped around me like a cold shroud. "Cassandra, can you hear me?" Uncle Thomas's voice cut through the fog. His face swam into focus above me, etched with worry, his hand gripping mine tightly. "Thank God," he whispered. A doctor appeared next. a woman with calm eyes and a tone that brooked no nonsense. She checked my pupils, flashed a penlight, and asked me to follow her finger with my good eye. "You have a severe concussion and a laceration requiring 23 stitches," she explained. "The CT scan shows no fracture, which is fortunate, but you'll need to be monitored closely." Her words fell like stones. 23 stitches. My own mother had swung a bottle hard enough to nearly crack my skull. The memory returned in fragments, the swing, the crack, the rush of warmth down my face, the horrified gasps. And my mother's expression, not horror, not regret, satisfaction. I must have made a sound because Uncle Thomas squeezed my hand. "It's okay. You're safe now." But was I? The doctor's voice shifted, careful, deliberate. "The police have been notified. This injury is consistent with assault, not an accident." My throat felt raw, but I forced out the words. "My mother." Uncle Thomas nodded grimly. "They're in custody, your mother, father, and Brandon. There were dozens of witnesses. They can't deny what happened." I lay back against the pillow, the truth settling like ice in my veins. My own family had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Words had turned into violence, and now the law was involved. The next 72 hours blurred into a haze of pain medication, nurse check-ins, and endless questions. The concussion left me dizzy, nauseous, and sensitive to every flicker of light. But worse than the physical agony was the emotional wreckage. My parents had always chosen Brandon over me. They had dismissed me, diminished me, ignored me. But this was war. On the third morning, Detective Sandra Walsh entered my hospital room, crisp navy pantsuit, a leather notebook in hand, and an air of quiet competence. She introduced herself and sat by my bed. "Miss Carter, I'm handling the investigation. If you feel strong enough, I'd like you to walk me through what happened." Uncle Thomas remained by my side as I spoke, my voice trembling but steady enough to recount the night. I told her about the whispers, the meeting in my father's study, the demand for my condo, my refusal, the confrontation in front of the guests. And finally, the moment my mother's hand wrapped around that bottle. Detective Walsh listened without interruption, her pen scratching steadily. When I finished, she nodded. "We've taken multiple statements from witnesses, and their accounts align with yours. Your mother is facing aggravated assault charges. Your father and brother are being charged as accessories." The words should have shocked me. Instead, I felt a dull, inevitable certainty. It was as if the entire nightmare had been building to this moment. "What happens next?" I asked. "The prosecutor will finalize charges. Given the severity of your injuries and the number of witnesses, the case is strong. There's also security camera footage from the house that captured the incident." So there it was. Evidence, witnesses, the law on my side. Yet all I felt was hollow. This wasn't victory. This was devastation. My family name would now be tied to police records, courtrooms, and headlines. After the detective left, Uncle Thomas leaned closer. "There's something else you should consider. Civil action. A lawsuit." My voice cracked. He nodded. "The criminal case punishes them, but it doesn't compensate you for medical bills, lost wages, or emotional harm. You deserve that." The idea of dragging this nightmare into a courtroom made my stomach churn. But he was right. This wasn't about money, it was about accountability. For too long, I had accepted their cruelty as normal. No more. 5 days later, I was discharged, my head wrapped, my body weak. Yet when I walked back into my condo, the place that had sparked this catastrophe, I felt something shift inside me. It was still mine. They had tried to take it, tried to destroy me for it, but I was still standing. And I made a promise to myself then, standing in the quiet of my living room, the Chicago skyline glittering beyond the glass. This wasn't over. They had struck me down, but I would rise. And for the first time, they would face consequences they couldn't escape. 6 weeks after the night that shattered everything, I found myself sitting in a courtroom, the air heavy with tension. My head had healed enough for the stitches to come out, but the scar remained, hidden beneath my hairline. It throbbed as if to remind me why I was here. At the front of the courtroom, my mother sat in a navy suit, her posture rigid, her once practiced grace fractured. My father, always composed, avoided my gaze, his silver hair catching the harsh lights. Brandon slouched beside them, eyes darting nervously around the room. The golden child no longer looked untouchable. He looked cornered. The prosecutor wasted no time. He laid out the case with precision, multiple eyewitnesses, my medical records, the police report, and most damning security footage from my parents' home. The video showed my mother gripping the champagne bottle, her arms swinging with intent, the shattering impact against my temple. Gasps had filled the courtroom when it played. There was no arguing with that. My mother's lawyer tried to paint her as a loving parent who had snapped in a moment of uncharacteristic weakness. He called it a lapse in judgment fueled by alcohol and family tension. But the footage, the testimonies, the 23 stitches on my head, none of it could be softened. By the end of the hearing, she accepted a plea deal. Guilty to second-degree assault. Her sentence was 5 years, with all but 6 months suspended, followed by probation. It was lenient compared to what she could have faced, but it was still a conviction. For a woman who prided herself on perfection, the humiliation was punishment of its own. My father and Brandon pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting, avoiding jail but receiving probation and community service. Still, the damage was irreversible. My father was asked to resign from his law firm. Brandon's company terminated his employment. And Jennifer, his fiancée, ended their engagement within weeks. Watching them, I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache. They had built their entire lives on the illusion of success, and now it crumbled in front of strangers. But the truth? They had done this to themselves. While the criminal case moved swiftly, the civil lawsuit unfolded like a slow burn. My attorney, Sarah Goldstein, was relentless. She deposed family friends who admitted they had seen years of favoritism. She subpoenaed financial records, exposing how my parents had subsidized Brandon's life, while I paid for everything myself. She built a case not only on the assault, but on the long pattern of neglect and unequal treatment. The damages she calculated stunned even me. Medical expenses, lost wages, therapy costs, and compensation for emotional trauma. It added up to over $1 million. They don't have the liquid assets to cover this, Sarah told me. They'll need to mortgage or sell their home, maybe both. When the settlement came, it was $1.2 million. Nearly everything they had. They sold the North Shore estate, drained retirement accounts, and liquidated investments. Watching them lose the house that had been a monument to their pride should have satisfied me. Instead, I felt nothing. This wasn't about money. It was about consequences. For decades, they had lived without accountability, believing Brandon's needs outweighed my very existence. That night, when my mother swung the bottle, she thought she could break me like she always had, with silence, with dismissal, with force. But this time, there were witnesses. This time, the world saw. Through it all, Uncle Thomas and Aunt Patricia stood by me. They attended hearings, sat beside me in depositions, and reminded me that not all family turns toxic. Their presence was a lifeline, proof that love can exist even where blood has failed. When the cases finally ended, I returned to my condo, the place that had sparked this war. Standing at the window overlooking Lake Michigan, I let the reality settle in. I had survived. I had held my ground. And my family, for once, had paid the price. But even as I breathed in that victory, I knew the fight wasn't over. Healing doesn't come with a judge's gavel or a signed settlement check. Healing is slower, messier, and far more personal. The scar on my temple would fade, but the memory of my mother's eyes in that moment, the satisfaction as the bottle came down, would haunt me. And so, I made a choice. I would not let this end with punishment. I would turn the wreckage into something greater. Because if my pain could build something that saved even one person from a similar fate, then maybe, just maybe, it was worth it. When the dust of courtrooms and legal filings finally settled, I returned to my condo in downtown Chicago. The same condo that had sparked this entire war now felt strangely foreign. The glass walls looked out across Lake Michigan, the city glittering beyond. But I no longer saw only success. I saw scars. I saw blood. I saw the broken remains of a family I had once begged to hold together. The physical healing was simple. Stitches out after 10 days. Concussion symptoms fading over 3 months. Follow-up scans confirming no lasting brain damage. My body, resilient in ways I never gave it credit for, knit itself back together. But the psychological healing was jagged, unpredictable, and far more painful. Nightmares came first. I dreamed of champagne bottles arcing toward me, of my mother's cold eyes, of Brandon's grip crushing my shoulder. I would wake tangled in sheets, my skin clammy, the phantom pain of glass-splitting skin pulsing in my temple. Sleep became a battle I rarely won. That was when I started therapy with Dr. Lydia Chen, a trauma specialist recommended by a colleague. She was steady, unflinching, and patient. In her quiet office, I began to unravel the knots I had carried since childhood. Trauma lives in the body, she explained. Your nervous system is still on high alert, trying to protect you from a threat that has already passed. We'll retrain it to trust safety again. Through talk therapy, EMDR, and mindfulness, I slowly began to reclaim pieces of myself. The startle reflex eased. The nightmares became less frequent. The gnawing belief that I had somehow deserved what happened began to loosen its grip. But healing didn't happen in isolation. Aunt Patricia brought me meals when I was too tired to cook. My cousin Lisa stopped by with flowers, sitting quietly when words felt too heavy. Uncle Thomas called every evening, his gentle voice reminding me that family could still mean love. Even friends I hadn't spoken to in months reappeared, offering rides to appointments or just a listening ear. It was in those moments, sitting at my dining table, bandaged and broken, surrounded by people who chose me, that I began to understand something profound. Blood isn't what makes a family. Loyalty does. Care does. Choice does. 6 months after the attack, I took an even bolder step. I used part of the settlement money to launch the New Beginnings Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting survivors of family violence. Legal aid, counseling, housing support. Everything I had wished I'd had at 18, I wanted to make available to others. The first fundraiser stunned me. Over $300,000 raised in a single evening. I stood at the podium, scar still faintly visible, and shared my story publicly for the first time. The room fell silent as I described not just the assault but the years of favoritism and neglect that led to it. Family violence doesn't always look like bruises, I told them. Sometimes it looks like being invisible. Sometimes it looks like love withheld. But make no mistake, those wounds cut just as deep. Thunderous applause followed. I stepped off the stage and into Aunt Patricia's embrace, tears streaming freely for the first time in months. For once, my voice hadn't been silenced. It had been amplified. And yet, even as the foundation grew, even as my circle of chosen family deepened, there were moments I found myself staring out my condo windows late at night, wondering about the people I had left behind. My father, reduced to a consultant at a smaller practice. My mother, her once spotless reputation cracked forever. Brandon, struggling to find work with his name tied to scandal. They had lost almost everything. And still, they hadn't lost the power they once held over me in my mind. Because here's the truth. Even when you cut ties, even when you win in court, even when you rebuild, the past whispers. It waits. It tests the edges of your healing. And 1 year after that night, I would be forced to face a decision that tested everything I thought I had learned. But before I share that twist, I want to ask you something. Have you ever tried to heal from wounds your family gave you, only to find the scars reopen when you least expect it? If you have, tell me your story in the comments. Because your words might be the reminder someone else needs that healing is possible, even when the past refuses to stay buried. Because the next chapter of my story isn't about courtrooms or settlements. It's about what happens when you finally find peace, only to discover your past knocking at the door. A full year passed before I felt like my life belonged to me again. The scar along my hairline had faded into a faint silver thread, almost invisible unless the light hit just right. The nightmares came less often, replaced by mornings where I woke to the sound of the lake against the shore instead of the phantom echo of glass breaking. My condo, once a battlefield, had transformed back into a sanctuary. The New Beginnings Foundation had grown faster than I ever dared to dream. We had opened a small office, hired 2 case managers, and partnered with local shelters. Survivors walked through our doors with the same haunted look I once carried, and slowly, with support, they walked out taller. It was exhausting work, yes, but it was the kind that healed me, even as it drained me. Each life we touched was a reminder that something beautiful could rise from ashes. Yet, as much as I poured myself into the foundation, there was still a quiet loneliness that lingered in the edges of my days. I told myself I didn't need companionship, that my independence was my crown. But healing doesn't erase longing, it only teaches you to see it clearly. It was at a charity gala, 6 months into the foundation's work, that I met Daniel. He was introduced to me by a mutual friend, a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Unlike so many others in the room, he didn't begin with small talk or a rehearsed compliment. Instead, he asked, "What gave you the courage to start New Beginnings?" The question startled me. Most people asked about numbers, donors, or strategy. Few asked about the heart behind it. So I told him. Not the whole story, just enough. His eyes never wavered, his attention steady, as if my words deserved every ounce of his focus. We began meeting for coffee, then dinner, then walks by the lake. Daniel was an architect, his mind always sketching invisible lines in the air, his conversations full of both practicality and wonder. He never treated me like glass, never looked at me with pity. When he noticed the scar, he didn't ask how I got it. He said, "It looks like a mark of survival." Slowly, without realizing it, I let him in. I laughed again, real, belly-deep laughter I hadn't heard from myself in years. I discovered what it felt like to share space with someone who expected nothing but honesty. There were nights we stayed up talking until dawn, and mornings when he brought coffee to my office just because he knew I'd skipped breakfast. And yet, I hesitated. Trust was a muscle I hadn't used in so long it felt weak, brittle. I worried that opening myself to love would undo the walls I had built so carefully. But Daniel never pushed. He simply waited, steady as stone, until the day I finally whispered, "I'm scared of letting anyone close." He smiled softly and said, "Then let's be scared together." 1 year after the attack, I hosted a private dinner to mark the anniversary, not as a memorial, but as a celebration of survival. Friends, colleagues, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Thomas, they filled my condo with warmth and laughter. For the first time, the walls echoed with joy instead of conflict. Daniel was there too, quietly fitting into the rhythm of my chosen family. At one point, I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Later, as we stood by the window overlooking the lake, he took my hand. "You've built something extraordinary," he said. "Not just this condo, not just the foundation, yourself. And I'd like to be part of whatever you build next." His words struck deep. For years, I had believed that building alone was the only way to survive. Now, for the first time, I considered the possibility of building alongside someone. The year that began with blood and betrayal was ending with hope and possibility. But life has a way of testing you just when you start to feel safe. Because only weeks later, I would hear a knock on my door, and when I opened it, the past I thought I had buried was standing there, waiting. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the knock came. I was curled on the sofa with a blanket, a book half open on my lap, the scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Daniel had just left after breakfast, and the condo felt warm, steady, like a place where life finally flowed without fear. That knock shattered the calm. I almost ignored it. Few people came unannounced. But something compelled me to rise, my bare feet soft against the hardwood floor. When I opened the door, the air left my lungs. Standing there, thinner than I remembered, was my mother. Her once polished appearance was gone, no silk scarf, no diamond studs, just a worn coat and tired eyes that seemed to carry a weight even heavier than my own. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The last time I had seen her, she was in a courtroom being sentenced. "Cassandra," she said finally, her voice rasping like gravel. "Please, I need to talk to you." Every instinct screamed to slam the door. Memories flashed. The arc of the champagne bottle, the crack against my temple, her eyes filled not with regret but with satisfaction. My hand tightened on the doorframe. "Why are you here?" She swallowed hard. "Because I have nowhere else to go." I let the silence hang, letting her words sink. "That's not my problem," I said, my tone colder than I expected. Her eyes shimmered but no tears fell. "I know I don't deserve it. Not after everything, but prison changes a person. Cassandra, I'm sick. The doctors say it's serious." The words struck, but I kept my face unreadable. "You mean the way you made me sick for years? The way you carved scars into me that no doctor can treat?" She flinched. For the first time she looked smaller than me. "I came to say I'm sorry," she whispered, "and to ask for your forgiveness." Forgiveness. The word burned. For months, therapists had guided me through rage and grief, teaching me that forgiveness wasn't about absolving the abuser, it was about freeing yourself from their grip. But now, standing in front of the woman who had birthed me and broken me, I realized forgiveness wasn't a simple choice. It was a battlefield. I crossed my arms. "You want forgiveness? Then tell me the truth. Tell me why. Why Brandon always came first. Why I was never enough. Why you hated me so much you wanted to destroy me." Her lips trembled. "Because you reminded me of myself." The confession cut like glass. "What?" She sank against the doorframe. "I wanted a perfect life, a perfect son, a perfect family. You were strong, independent. You didn't need me. And every time I saw that, it reminded me of everything I had given up, my career, my dreams. I resented you because you refused to be small the way I made myself small." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Years of confusion unraveled in that single confession. It wasn't love that failed me. It was her own reflection. I shook my head. "That's not an excuse. That's cowardice." "I know," she said, her voice breaking, "and I live with it every day. I just wanted you to hear me say it before I'm gone." I gripped the door tighter, torn between slamming it and letting her words seep into me. This was the woman who had nearly killed me. The woman who had stood by as my father and brother stole every piece of joy from me. But she was also the woman who had just admitted, for the first time in her life, that she was wrong. Finally, I stepped back. "You can come in for 15 minutes, nothing more." Her shoulders sagged, relief flooding her face. She stepped inside, and the condo that had once been her prize now became the stage for our reckoning. We sat across from each other, silence thick. For the next quarter of an hour, she spoke haltingly, awkwardly about regret, about fear, about the years wasted worshipping Brandon while ignoring me. I listened, not because I owed her forgiveness, but because I owed myself closure. When the time was up, I stood. "I don't know if I can forgive you, maybe one day. Maybe never. But I hear you. That's all I can give." Tears finally fell down her cheeks. She nodded, rose slowly, and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned once more. "You were always stronger than all of us. I just wish I had told you sooner." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone with the echo of words I had craved my entire life. Words that came too late. But closure doesn't always arrive wrapped in forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in knowing you survived long enough to hear the truth. The morning after my mother's visit, I stood at my window staring out at Lake Michigan, its surface rippling silver in the dawn light. For years I had believed that if my parents ever admitted their wrongs, if they ever told me I was strong, it would heal me. And yet, when the words finally came, they didn't feel like salvation. They felt like ashes. Too little. Too late. I touched the faint scar at my temple, the one I hid easily under my hair. A mark that once filled me with shame now felt like a reminder. Not of violence but of survival. It whispered a truth my family had spent decades trying to bury. I had built a life without them. And I would keep building, with or without their approval. Over the following weeks, I returned to my rhythm. Board meetings, foundation fundraisers, evenings spent with Daniel, who had quietly become an anchor in my life. For the first time, I wasn't chasing recognition or bracing for rejection. I was simply living, and that was enough. But healing isn't a straight line. Some days I caught myself wondering if I should have given my mother more time, if I should have let her back in. Guilt clung like smoke. That's when Dr. Chen reminded me, boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. You chose survival, Cassandra. You chose freedom. One evening, I hosted another small gathering at my condo. The same space that once nearly became Brandon's inheritance now overflowed with laughter and warmth. Colleagues, friends, my chosen family, people who saw me not as a means to an end, but as someone worth loving. When Daniel raised a toast, his words sank into me. To Cassandra, who proves that strength isn't built from what we're given, but from what we refuse to surrender. The room erupted in applause. My chest swelled with a kind of pride I had never felt before. Not pride rooted in proving myself to those who dismissed me, but pride in knowing I had finally broken free of their hold. And still, the scar tingled, as if to remind me of the past. Because that's the truth about wounds, they never disappear completely. They stay, etched into skin and memory, as warnings and as testaments. But scars are not chains, they're stories. Proof that we walked through fire and emerged. Not unburned, but unbroken. So when I think of my parents now stripped of reputation, struggling in silence, I no longer feel the desperate hunger for their approval. I feel nothing, and in that nothingness, I find peace. As for Brandon, I've heard whispers of him working odd jobs, his arrogance crumbling without the scaffolding of our parents' favoritism. Once, that knowledge would have brought me satisfaction. Now, it only brings me distance. His downfall isn't my victory. My victory is simply living well without him. The condo still stands, mine alone. The foundation thrives. Daniel and I are building something real, something steady. My life is no longer a battlefield. It's a garden, scarred but blooming. And to anyone watching this, anyone who has ever felt erased by the people meant to love you, I want to leave you with this. Your worth is not defined by their blindness. Your strength is not diminished by their cruelty. You can rise. You can build. You can thrive on your own terms. If my story has kept you here until now, then I know you understand the weight of betrayal, the ache of survival, and the triumph of choosing yourself. But my journey doesn't end here. Healing is lifelong. Boundaries must be guarded, and freedom, once claimed, must be nurtured. So stay with me. If you've ever faced a moment where you had to walk away from blood to save yourself, share it in the comments. And if you're ready to hear more stories of resilience, betrayal, and redemption, make sure you're subscribed, because the next chapter I'll share might just echo your own. The night they tried to take everything from me was the night I finally understood. Sometimes, the family you lose is the freedom you gain. When the storm finally quieted, I found myself standing in a life I never imagined I could create. The path had been brutal, littered with betrayal and scars, but it led me here to a place of peace, purpose, and clarity. I no longer measured my value by how loudly my parents praised my brother, or by how many times they overlooked me. I measured it by the strength it took to walk away, by the boundaries I built, and by the freedom I chose. The condo that once sparked a war is now my sanctuary. Sunlight streams through the tall windows in the morning, casting warmth across the very walls they tried to take from me. At night, I stand on the balcony and look out over the glittering Chicago skyline, a reminder that resilience shines brightest in the darkest hours. Healing, I've learned, is not about erasing the past. It is about integrating it, carrying the lessons without letting the pain define you. My scar may always be there, faint but permanent, yet it tells a story of survival rather than defeat. Family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, family is the ones who show up, who hold your hand in the hospital, who cheer for you when no one else will. My chosen family, Uncle Thomas, Aunt Patricia, my cousin Lisa, Daniel, and so many others have taught me that love built on respect is worth more than loyalty built on fear. So if you are listening now, let my story remind you. You have the right to walk away from what breaks you. You have the right to protect your peace. And you have the power to create a new beginning, no matter what was taken from you. Freedom is not given, it is claimed. And once you claim it, no one can take it away.